The night he erased me, I smiled, not because I forgave him, not because I was okay. I smiled because I finally understood how he'd done it, and more importantly, how I was going to undo it. My name is Lillian Cross. I'm 24 years old, and until 8 months ago, I believed my father was simply strict, controlling maybe, old-fashioned. The kind of man who believed discipline built character and silence built strength. I didn't realize silence was the cage. You don't wake up one day and decide your parent is your adversary. It happens in small edits, conversations reframed, stories retold slightly differently, names that stop being mentioned. My mother died when I was 11, official cause, complications after surgery. Unofficial reality, she never fully recovered from living with a man who needed the world arranged around him like furniture. After she passed, my father, Henry Cross, became both martyr and architect. He moved us from Boston to a suburb outside Hartford within 3 months. New school. New charge. New narrative. Your mother's family was unstable, he told me the first week we moved. Best not to involve them. I didn't argue. I was 11, and he was calm when he lied. That was his gift. If you've ever lived with someone who rewrites history with a steady voice, you know how hard it is to detect the edit. He never shouted, he corrected, he never forbade, he suggested. Your Aunt Clara drinks, you don't need that influence. Your grandfather was careless with money. They never reached out because they moved on, sweetheart. That's life. He said it kindly, as if protecting me. By 16, I stopped asking about them. By 18, I wasn't sure they existed beyond old photographs tucked into my mother's cedar chest, the only thing he hadn't thrown away. And here's the part that matters. My father built a reputation. He wasn't just Henry Cross. He was Henry Cross, founder of Cross Urban Developments, the man who revitalized half of downtown Hartford, charity galas, Chamber of Commerce awards. Newspaper features with headlines like "Local Visionary Invests in Community." He built buildings, he built influence, and quietly he built control. I worked for him straight out of college, not because I had to. I had a degree in architectural design. I had options, but he framed it differently. Why go somewhere else when you can build your legacy here? Legacy, that word does something to a daughter, so I joined the firm as a junior designer. Long hours, minimal credit, my ideas filtered upward through him. I told myself I was earning my place. That's what he always said. Earn your place, Lillian. Nothing is handed to you. What he meant was, nothing is handed to you unless I'm holding it. The humiliation didn't happen all at once. It happened at the Riverfront Redevelopment Gala. Black tie, 500 guests, investors, city officials, press. We were unveiling the Harbor District project, the biggest contract Cross Urban Developments had ever secured. I designed the concept layout, the waterfront glass facade. Mine, the public green terraces, mine. The mixed-use integration model that made the city council approve zoning exceptions, also mine. I worked 6 months on that proposal. He reviewed it once, changed 2 sentences, presented it as his. I let that go. But that night was different. I should explain something about my father. He doesn't need to crush you privately. He prefers witnesses. On stage, under soft gold lighting, he spoke about vision, perseverance, family values. Then he gestured toward me in the front row. My daughter Lillian, he said warmly into the microphone. She's learning the ropes. Learning, the room turned politely. I felt heat climb my spine. She's shadowed this project, he continued, and one day when she's ready, she'll carry this forward. Shadowed, my name was not on the renderings behind him. The press packet credited him solely. The design board displayed his initials. Learning, shadowing. I realized something right then. He wasn't stealing credit. He was erasing authorship. There's a difference. Stealing implies acknowledgement. Erasure implies replacement. The applause came. Investors nodded. A councilwoman leaned toward me and said, "Must be nice to have such a mentor." I smiled. That's when it clicked. If he could publicly minimize me that easily, then the isolation from my mother's family wasn't accidental. It was strategic, and strategy leaves patterns. I didn't confront him that night. That's what he would have expected. Instead, I watched. He networked. He laughed. He shook hands with people who trusted him because he curated the room, and I noticed something else. Near the back of the ballroom stood a man I recognized from childhood photographs. Tall, silver hair, same jawline as my mother. He wasn't mingling, he was observing. When our eyes met, he didn't look confused, he looked relieved. That was the second crack. 2 days later, I searched a name I hadn't typed in 13 years. Clara Whitmore, my mother's sister. She appeared immediately. Licensed attorney. Estate law based in Providence. Alive, active, successful, not unstable, not estranged from society, not invisible. I stared at the screen. My father had said they'd moved on. They hadn't moved anywhere. They were an hour and 40 minutes away. Here's the thing about controlled environments. They depend on limited information. Once you introduce new data, the architecture shifts. I didn't call immediately. I gathered corporate filings, property records, historical purchase documents for cross-urban development's first 3 acquisitions. That's when I found the anomaly, the seed capital. The original funding that launched my father's company 12 years ago came from a private transfer labeled Whitmore Holdings Trust. My chest went cold. I dug deeper. The trust had been dissolved 2 years later, no public explanation. My father always said he bootstrapped his first development with a second mortgage and grit. Grit apparently had a legal structure. I leaned back in my chair and let the pieces rearrange themselves. My mother died 11 years ago. The trust dissolved 9 years ago. The company expanded exponentially after that. If Whitmore Holdings Trust was connected to my mother's family, then my father hadn't just isolated me from them, he'd used them and then cut them out. Now we were getting somewhere. I drove to Providence the following Saturday without telling him. The Whitmore and Hale Law Office occupied a quiet brick building near the waterfront, no flashy signage, just understated brass lettering. Clara opened the door herself. She knew who I was immediately. You can tell when someone has rehearsed this moment in their mind for years. Lillian, she said softly, no accusation, no dramatics, just my name, spoken like it hadn't been forbidden. We sat in her office for 3 hours, and this is where the story shifts, because the narrative I'd been fed my entire adolescence collapsed in under 10 minutes. They hadn't abandoned me. My father cut contact. He returned letters. He blocked visitation. He claimed I needed space. After my mother passed, my grandfather established a development trust to help Henry stabilize financially. It wasn't charity, it was partnership. My mother's inheritance funded the first cross-urban acquisition. When my grandfather died 2 years later, control of the trust legally transferred to Henry as surviving spouse, contingent upon maintaining family transparency. He dissolved it within months. Clara had tried to contest it. Henry settled privately. Confidentiality agreements were signed. The Whitmores walked away to avoid public scandal while I was still a minor. He hadn't just erased my family, he'd absorbed their leverage. I sat there, absorbing something colder than anger, precision. He didn't want competition, not in business, not in influence, not in narrative, and certainly not in my loyalty. Why didn't you tell me when I turned 18? I asked. Clara held my gaze. We tried, you never responded. I felt something heavy drop in my stomach. What do you mean? She turned her monitor toward me. Email after email, different addresses, different years, no replies, all bounced back or never opened. I swallowed. He controlled my accounts until I moved out for college. He filtered mail. He framed every missed contact as their disinterest. I wasn't abandoned. I was intercepted. Silence wasn't neglect. It was manufactured. And suddenly the gala made sense. If my visibility grew, so did questions. If I gained independence, so did alliances. If I reconnected with Whitmore capital or legal backing, he'd lose narrative control. And men like my father don't fear confrontation, they fear exposure. I drove home in silence. He was in the study when I walked in. Providence? He asked without looking up. He always knew more than he admitted. Yes. And I set my bag down carefully, and I think it's time we reviewed the original Harbor District ownership filings. That got his attention. His eyes lifted slowly. You're tired, he said calmly. We'll talk Monday. I met his gaze and held it. No, I said evenly. We'll talk when I'm ready. And for the first time in my life. He didn't correct me, he studied me, as if trying to calculate whether I was still manageable. I smiled, not warmly, not kindly, just enough for him to understand something fundamental had shifted. He thought he built my career, he thought he shaped my network, he thought he owned the narrative. What he didn't realize is that the Whitmores built the foundation, and I had just reopened the door he sealed. The gala humiliation wasn't the worst thing he did. It was the mistake because it forced me to look, and once you start looking at someone who spent years controlling the light, you begin to see where the shadows really fall, and that's when I decided I wouldn't confront him emotionally, I wouldn't argue legacy, I wouldn't beg for credit, I would let him build one more tower, and then I would pull the paperwork, quietly, strategically, in front of the right witnesses. He liked public stages, so did I. He just didn't know I'd been studying the architecture. There's a moment in every long game where you stop reacting and start positioning. That shift is quiet. No dramatic music, no confrontation, just a change in posture. I stopped defending myself. I started collecting leverage. If you think revenge is about anger, you've never watched a developer negotiate. My father built towers by understanding pressure points, zoning boards, tax incentives, quiet favors traded over whiskey. I learned from the best. The difference is I wasn't building up. I was mapping load-bearing walls. Monday morning, I arrived at the office before him. Cross Urban Developments occupies the top 3 floors of a restored brick warehouse downtown. Exposed beams, polished concrete, the aesthetic of authenticity without the inconvenience of history. My name is still on the internal directory as junior designer. My keycard still works. I logged into the shared drive and opened the Harbor District master file. I wasn't looking at renderings, I was looking at funding structure. There it was again. Whitmore Holdings Trust, referenced indirectly in archived documents as foundational equity partner. Not erased, just buried. He'd folded it into the corporate narrative, diluted its visibility through restructuring, and reframed himself as sole visionary. Clean work, too clean, and that's always the flaw. When someone works that hard to smooth the surface, they assume no one will scratch it. I called Clara that afternoon. I want to understand the confidentiality agreement. There was a pause. Are you planning something? She asked. Yes. Another pause, then measured. Come to Providence this weekend. Before I get there, I need to explain something about reputation. Reputation is currency in development. Banks don't just loan money based on spreadsheets. They loan based on perceived stability. Investors don't just buy vision, they buy confidence. If Henry Cross looks unshakable, his projects move. If doubt enters the room, funding tightens. You don't destroy a man like that by yelling. You introduce doubt, subtly. In the right room, that week he treated me like nothing had changed. He asked about revisions. He assigned me minor presentation edits. He mentioned future expansion as though I were still apprenticing at his feet. Legacy takes time, he said over coffee in his glass-walled office. I nodded, of course. Here's the thing, when someone underestimates you, don't correct them. Let them continue. It keeps them predictable. Providence smelled like salt and old money. Clara had the full file ready when I arrived. The trust dissolution agreement, the settlement terms, the clause that mattered most. Any public misrepresentation of foundational funding could legally reopen claims. My father had been careful. He didn't deny the trust existed. He simply minimized it, reframed it, allowed interviews to imply he self-funded. It was a gray area. Gray areas are my favorite because they only require one spotlight. Why didn't you pursue it further? I asked Clara. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. Your grandfather didn't want litigation while you were still a minor. He thought preserving your stability mattered more than reclaiming recognition. Stability, there's that word again, used to justify silence. Does the clause still stand? I asked. She met my eyes. Yes. And if evidence of deliberate public misrepresentation surfaced, it would give us grounds. Us, not me, not her, us. For the first time in years, I felt aligned, not protected. Aligned, the opportunity came sooner than I expected. 3 weeks later, Cross Urban announced a public-private partnership press conference for Harbor District Phase 2. Bigger funding, state-level attention. This wasn't just a ribbon cutting, it was validation. Henry would speak, media would attend, investors would be present, and printed in the press packet, a timeline of Cross Urban's origin story, bootstrapped beginnings, second mortgage, vision and risk, no Whitmore mention. I held the packet in my hands and felt something settle. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was correction. The night before the conference, he knocked on my apartment door, unannounced. He does that when he wants control of a conversation. "I've been hearing things," he said, stepping inside without invitation, "about Providence." I didn't offer him a seat. "I had lunch with Clara," I said evenly. He exhaled through his nose, almost amused. "She's always been dramatic." There it is, minimization. She showed me the trust documents. Silence, not shock, assessment. "And," he asked, "and I'm curious why your public materials omit it." He walked to the window and looked out like a man evaluating weather patterns. "It was transitional funding," he said smoothly, "minimal. It was foundational equity." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You're young, Lillian. You don't understand the optics of early-stage capital." "Ah, optics, the optics of pretending you built something alone," I asked softly. He turned slowly. "Be careful." There was no volume in his voice. "That's how you know the warning is real." "Careful of what?" "Aligning yourself with people who don't have your best interests in mind." I held his gaze. "Is that what you think they're doing?" "I think they're using you." The projection would have been impressive if it weren't transparent. "I'll see you tomorrow," I said. He studied me for another second, then left. I didn't sleep much, not from nerves, from clarity. The plan wasn't to interrupt the conference. It wasn't to confront him mid-speech. Public theatrics favor the louder personality. That's his arena. I prefer paperwork. The conference room was packed. State officials, investors, press. Henry stood at the podium, confident, measured, telling the story of Cross Urban's origin. "I mortgaged everything," he said with practiced humility. "Took a risk when no one believed in the vision." I watched from the side, then I watched the audience, people nodding, writing notes, internalizing myth. He reached the slide with the company's first acquisition, the warehouse on Elm Street. He paused for emphasis. "Our first purchase," he said, "proof that belief pays off." That's when I stepped forward, not dramatically, just enough to request the microphone during Q&A. He hesitated half a beat before handing it over. He couldn't refuse publicly without appearing insecure. "Lillian Cross," I said into the mic, "architectural designer with Cross Urban." I felt the weight of the room shift slightly. I'd love to clarify something for the record. His eyes were on me now, steady, controlled. "Cross Urban's initial acquisition in 2012, I continued, was partially funded through Whitmore Holdings Trust, correct?" Silence, not chaos, just silence. Investors turned their heads. A reporter looked up sharply. Henry smiled. "Yes, a minor family contribution." "Minor," I nodded. "Minor in percentage or minor in influence?" A ripple. He kept the smile. "Percentage." "Would you be comfortable specifying that percentage?" There it was, the first crack, because specificity demands truth. He inhaled once. 38%. The room shifted again. 38% is not minor. A journalist scribbled something. "And was the trust dissolved voluntarily or as part of a legal settlement?" I asked. His jaw flexed. "That's not relevant to Harbor District." Foundational funding is relevant to credibility. The temperature in the room dropped 2 degrees. He couldn't shut me down without validating the question. "Voluntarily," he said. Clara stood at the back of the room. She didn't move, but she didn't need to. "Thank you," I said, handing back the mic. I sat down, no accusations, no speeches, just questions. Here's what you need to understand. I didn't expose him that day, I destabilized him. Because once a journalist smells an incomplete origin story, they don't let go. By that evening, 2 local outlets had emailed requesting clarification on Cross-Urban's early funding structure. By morning, one had submitted a public records request. Henry called me at 6:12 a.m. "What are you doing?" he asked. His tone wasn't angry. It was tight, clarifying. I said, "You blindsided me. You omitted information. You embarrassed the company." "No," I corrected gently. "I invited transparency." There's power in reframing. He was quiet for a long moment. "You think you're playing chess," he said finally. I almost smiled. "You taught me the game." And then I hung up. Over the next 2 weeks, the narrative shifted, not dramatically, strategically. Articles began including phrases like, "Early capital support from Whitmore Family Trust," "Settlement following dissolution," questions about founder transparency. Investors don't panic over gray areas, but they watch, and Henry knew they were watching. He called an internal meeting, spoke about unity, about family loyalty, about protecting legacy. I sat at the conference table and said nothing, because he was the one on defense now, and defense is exhausting, but this wasn't the end, this was positioning. Because I wasn't finished correcting the record. He built his empire on narrative control, and narrative control collapses when someone else holds documentation. Clara and I weren't pursuing litigation, not yet. We were doing something more effective. We were reopening conversations with the original private investors who'd partnered with Whitmore before Cross-Urban existed, and they remembered things differently. Here's what he didn't anticipate. Investors talk to each other, quietly. If enough of them begin questioning leadership integrity, funding conditions change, timelines slow, confidence erodes. He didn't lose everything overnight. That would be theatrical. He lost momentum, and for a developer, momentum is oxygen. 3 months after the conference, Harbor District Phase 2 was delayed, officially zoning reconsiderations, unofficially investors requesting additional oversight clauses. Henry began showing up to work earlier, leaving later. He aged in increments. Small lines around his mouth. Shorter temper with senior staff, and still he never confronted me directly again because he didn't know how much I knew, and uncertainty is corrosive. The lowest point for him came quietly. A private investor dinner, 6 major backers. I was invited this time, formally credited as lead design architect. That title mattered. Halfway through the meal, one of the investors asked him directly, "Henry, before we expand into New Haven, I'd like full disclosure on the Whitmore situation." There it was. Not from me, from Capital. He looked at me across the table, not accusing, not furious, just aware. The cage door he built years ago had swung open, and the wind was changing direction. When we left the restaurant, he didn't speak until we reached the parking lot. "You could have handled this privately," he said. I looked at him calmly. "You had 13 years to handle it privately." Silence, cars passing, city lights reflecting off glass buildings he once believed were monuments. "You're tearing down what I built," he said. "No," I replied softly. "I'm correcting the blueprint." He stared at me for a long time, and in that stare, for the first time, I didn't see authority. I saw calculation giving way to fatigue, control slipping, and I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished. But the final move, that required patience. Because dismantling a reputation is one thing, redefining authorship is another. And I wasn't just here to destabilize him. I was here to build something he couldn't claim. Momentum is a fragile thing. When it's yours, you barely notice it. When it slows, you feel it in your lungs. By early autumn, Cross-Urban wasn't collapsing. It was hesitating. Projects delayed, investors cautious, meetings longer, contracts reviewed twice. No scandal, no headline implosion, just doubt, and doubt spreads quietly through rooms that once felt cert. My father still walked into board meetings in tailored suits, still spoke in measured tones, still projected authority. But now he was answering questions instead of dictating direction. That shift matters. You might think this was enough: public correction, investor scrutiny, professional discomfort. But here's the thing about erasure: it leaves a mark, and I wasn't interested in making him uncomfortable. I was interested in reclaiming authorship, not emotionally, structurally. The opportunity came through Clara. One of Whitmore's long-standing partners, a firm specializing in sustainable mixed-use development, was exploring expansion into Connecticut. They wanted architectural leadership with local knowledge and clean credibility. Clara asked one simple question: if you weren't working for your father, what would you build? Not what would you fix, what would you build? That question does something to you when you've spent years defending your existence. I didn't answer immediately because the truth felt dangerous, but once it surfaced, it didn't retreat. I'd build community spaces that aren't built for headlines, I said, smaller scale. Accessible housing integrated with public design, projects that don't need ribbon cuttings to justify themselves. Clara nodded once. Good, write the proposal. For the first time, I wasn't revising someone else's vision. I was drafting my own. No cross-urban branding, no inherited legacy, just Whitmore-backed seed capital and a clean board structure with shared oversight, transparent funding, transparent governance, the opposite of everything that built his cage. We named it Anchor Collective. Not flashy, intentional, because anchors don't float for applause, they hold. When I handed in my resignation at Cross Urban, it was anticlimactic. He read the letter once, set it down. Is this Clara's idea? He asked. It's mine. You're walking away from a guaranteed position. I'm stepping into one. His jaw tightened. Do you think they won't use you the same way? That question might have hurt 6 months earlier. Now it sounded tired. I structured the board, I said calmly. No single-party control. He understood what that meant. No Henry Cross scenario, no silent consolidation, no narrative manipulation. You're making a mistake, he said finally. Maybe, I replied, but it'll be mine. That's when I saw it: not anger, not rage, loss, because control isn't just about dominance, it's about relevance, and I was removing his. Anchor Collective's first project was small, a 3-building adaptive reuse of an old textile mill outside New Haven, affordable live-work spaces, community garden integration, shared childcare facility. Not glamorous, necessary. Whitmore funding covered initial equity. Private investors, some formerly loyal to Cross Urban, joined cautiously, not because they hated my father, because they trusted stability, and stability now had a different face. Mine. Here's the thing about building something clean: you don't have to defend it. The paperwork aligns, the narrative matches the structure. Transparency isn't exhausting, it's efficient. Within 6 months, Anchor secured a state sustainability grant that Cross Urban had quietly pursued and lost. Not because we outmaneuvered them politically, because our governance documentation passed review without footnotes. That matters more than charisma. The real fracture happened at the Hartford Development Council Summit, annual event, closed-door panels, major players only. Henry was scheduled to present Cross Urban's 5-year expansion strategy. I was invited to sit on a sustainability innovation panel, separate rooms, separate agendas. Until someone decided it would be interesting to combine Q&A segments at the end. Developers love optics, they rarely consider consequences. The ballroom was quieter than the gala months earlier, more serious, more strategic. Henry presented first: strong numbers, adjusted projections, confidence restored at least on paper. Then my panel discussed community integration models, data-backed, collaborative funding structures, shared oversight boards. When Q&A opened, a council member asked, given the recent scrutiny around early-stage transparency in Hartford development, how do both of you ensure long-term accountability? The room stilled slightly, not dramatically, but enough. Henry answered first. Cross Urban has always operated with integrity, he said evenly. Recent misunderstandings have been clarified. Clarified, interesting word. Then the microphone shifted to me. I didn't look at him, I looked at the council member. At Anchor Collective, I said, no single individual holds majority narrative control. All foundational funding is disclosed in public filings. Oversight is shared. That way, no future leader can rewrite the origin story. It wasn't an accusation, it was contrast, the most powerful form of exposure. Henry's face didn't change, but several investors in the audience glanced between us. Comparisons form silently, and once they form, they don't dissolve. After the summit, he approached me in the hallway. Not aggressively, not even angrily. You've made your point, he said quietly. I wasn't making one. Yes, you were. We stood in that neutral space between conference rooms. No stage, no audience, just us. You could have come to me, he said. I did, I replied. Years ago, you called it disrespect. He exhaled. For a moment, he looked older than I'd ever seen him. You think I did all this out of malice? I studied him carefully. No, I said honestly, I think you did it out of fear. That landed. Because men like my father don't see themselves as villains, they see themselves as protectors, providers, architects of stability, but fear builds cages just as effectively as cruelty. You were going to leave eventually, he said. Yes. And I couldn't risk losing control of the company. There it was, not apology, admission. I wasn't something to control, I said softly. You were leverage. Silence, that was the truest thing either of us had said. The final unraveling didn't come from litigation. It came from opportunity. Anchor Collective secured a joint venture with a national firm entering the Northeast market. They wanted a local partner with clean governance and adaptive design credibility. Cross Urban pitched aggressively. So did we. The decision wasn't announced publicly at first, just emails between executives, then a press release draft circulated for review. Anchor Collective selected as primary development partner. Cross Urban thanked for submission. I received the confirmation call while reviewing structural plans at the mill site. Clara's voice was steady. You've been awarded the contract. I closed my eyes briefly, not from shock, from closure, because this wasn't about beating him, it was about building without him. He called that night, not at dawn, not in anger, just once. I saw the release, he said. Yes. You built this fast. I built it clean. Long pause, you don't need to destroy what I have left. I'm not. He hesitated. You're not going to pursue legal action. It wasn't a question, it was a hope. No, I said, exposure was enough. And it was. His projects continued, smaller scale, slower growth, more oversight. He remained in business, but not untouchable, and that was the shift. Untouchable is a dangerous place for anyone to live. The coldest part, it wasn't the conference question, it wasn't the summit contrast, it wasn't the joint venture win, it was something smaller. 6 months later, at a city planning roundtable, a young developer approached me. I used to intern at Cross Urban, she said. You're why I applied to Anchor. Why, I asked. Because I saw what happened, and I wanted somewhere the credit matched the work. That's when it hit me, revenge isn't loud, it's replacement. He built a system that erased authorship. I built one that protected it. He controlled narrative. I institutionalized transparency. He guarded power. I distributed it. That's not destruction, that's evolution. I saw him once more that winter, coffee shop near the river. He looked thinner, less polished, still composed. Are you happy? He asked. Yes. He nodded slowly. I never meant to erase you. I know. That surprised him. You just couldn't afford competition. He didn't argue. We sat in silence for a minute, then I stood. I hope you build something honest next, I said, and I meant it, because here's the truth. I didn't need him to fall. I needed him to lose control over my story, and once I reclaimed it, he could keep whatever remained. The night he minimized me at that gala, I thought I'd been humiliated. What I didn't realize was that he handed me something invaluable. Clarity. Clarity is colder than anger, sharper than resentment, and far more strategic. He built towers, I rebuilt the foundation. And when people ask how Anchor Collective grew so quickly, I tell them something simple. Good architecture doesn't just hold weight, it reveals where the cracks were hiding. He once told me to earn my place. I did, just not in his house. And that's the part he never saw coming.